Today we are talking with Verne Harnish, the author of the book Scaling Up, How a Few Companies Make It and Why the Rest Don't, which is a follow-up on a previous book that was written with the title Rockefeller Habits 2.0. Welcome to Readara.
Glad to be here, Manish.
You have a wonderful title, Scaling Up, that attracts virtually every entrepreneur who is started or who has just recently started or is in the process of expanding or growing his company. What is the central message in the book?
Well, first of all, that we've got plenty of startups, Manish. There's 11,000 startups an hour in the world. The challenge is, how do you get beyond the 76% that are just the entrepreneur with not a single other employee? And so the central message is, what are the four areas that you need to focus on? People, strategy, execution, and cash, so that you can scale up the business beyond yourself and begin to get some other people in there helping you drive the organization. And ultimately, first cross that magic million mark, which is what it takes to get into the entrepreneurs organization I founded 30 years ago. Then on up to the rarefied air above 10 million, 100 million, and then the few companies that are able to get up above $1 billion.
I think you have somewhere in the book as to some kind of a statistics that there are 28 million companies in the United States. Only 17,000 have sales over 50 million, and even fewer, 2,500, have sales or they surpass 500 million.
Exactly. It is rarefied space up there, Manish. And I'm not saying the folks that are reading Scaling Up want to get up to there, but if they want to have a meaningful income and be able to have the kind of freedom that all entrepreneurs, when they started, longed for, that's really why we wrote the book, was to get to a point where I just did a piece on one of our clients who's running 5 companies, and he does it one day a week on Thursdays. Now you've got both the income flow, the impact, and you've got your freedom back.
Wow. What is the journey? I mean, you, as an entrepreneur, you're driven by some cause, or you're driven by some problem solving, or you're driven by simply profit motive. But what is that makes people start business?
Yeah, normally it's because you're unemployable. You got fed up at the place you were at. You saw that you could do it better, which is you've got the new mousetrap. What's interesting, rarely is it a passion. We just hosted Cal Newport, which if you haven't had a chance to interview him, I think would be spectacular. But this idea of following your passion really is misleading to most people, because most people don't even know what their passion is. I couldn't say that when I was young, I had a passion for what I'm doing today. It was more of one of these just lucky breaks and a mentor who happened to say, hey, why don't you go right instead of left? And as Cal said, it's when you start getting good at something that it becomes a passion, versus you say, what's my passion? And then figure out how to be good at it. And so I think normally it starts with this idea that, hey, you're just frustrated. You want to go out and do something on your own, be your own boss, and you jump into the fray. And, we have a joke. An entrepreneur is someone who'd rather work 16 hours for themselves than 8 hours for someone else. But very quickly, that quits being a joke. And so I wrote the book, seeing a lot of entrepreneurs trapped by their own companies, and said, can we give them a set of tools that I developed at this course that's still hosted on the campus of MIT. This is our 25th anniversary. So really, this was the curriculum that we taught thousands of entrepreneurs of how to escape and both scale a business and, again, get their life back.
Is there any personality that is involved, that certain kind of personality traits as an entrepreneur you need, or certain kind of set of circumstances that have to come together to get you where you want? For example, a very famous example would be, obviously there is Microsoft, but there was Harvard Graphics before that. There was also, WordStar that got trampled along the way, and many that have come and gone that way. But what makes certain people focused on the growth and expansion and more that others just are satiated or happy where they are?
Well, it's a great set of questions, and really 3 things come to mind. First, Bill Gross, who built Idea Labs, launched 100 companies, has funded 100 more. On top of that, wanted to go back and look at, all right, what separated the winners from the losers? And he looked at the same 4 areas that we dive into in scaling up: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And his first thing he learned is that all 4 are important. It's like a 4-legged stool, and if you're missing one of those legs, it's going to topple over. But there is a fifth that's actually trumps them all, and that is market timing. If you hit the wave right, you win. If you hit the wave wrong, you lose. Bill had funded a company that was YouTube, but it was just too early. YouTube hit the wave. And so I think first, there is a timing. And a lot of times entrepreneurs struggle with their business. And if you can just hang on, persevere, probably one of the key character traits. If you can just persevere long enough until what you do is all of a sudden in vogue, then you can ride the wave. The second, and I played a game. I was moving hundreds of entrepreneurs every year through this program that's still hosted at MIT. I mentioned it was called the Birthing of Giants. Now it's called EMP. And so I said, hey, after spending 3 years with them, could I get good at guessing? And then I began actually placing financial bets, guessing at who was going to scale furthest, fastest. And I got pretty good at it. And one of the key characteristics is a thirst for learning. Let's go back. You mentioned Bill Gates. In my second book, I highlighted the greatest business decisions. Bill Gates' famous Think Weeks. Almost from the very beginning, he knew that nothing creative can come out of your head that you don't put in first. And so twice a year, he'd isolate himself for a week. His record was 112 books, manuscripts, PhD theses, white papers, cuddle up to your site for a week. And it was out of those Think Weeks that he got the real breakthroughs that have kept Microsoft relevant still today. We saw more recently Mark Zuckerberg last year commit to read a book every 2 weeks. Mark Cuban, the famous judge on Shark Tank and Dallas Maverick owner. I've known Mark for 30 years, but didn't realize till I read his book that since his 20s, he's had a routine of reading for 3 hours every single day. And all he's trying to do is find one idea that can kind of put him slightly ahead of the competition, one of the 155 companies that he's invested in. We just interviewed Larry Page at Fortune Magazine, the CEO of Google. And Alan Murray, our senior editor, said, hey, so Larry, how did you learn to be a CEO? And Larry looked at him strange and said, look, I just read a lot. When we went to go name the company, I read 3 books on naming. And so we're pretty adamant that leaders are readers, leaders are learners. And so that is critical in terms of a characteristic, a thirst for knowledge. And then I think the third is at some point being willing to let go. It's this what got you here won't get you there syndrome. In the very beginning, you've got to grab the reins and drive the thing hard. But at some point, one of our audience members, when we were hosting Mark Cuban last year, asked the question, all right, Mark, what's the biggest mistake you've made in business? A good standard business question. And Mark gave us, initially a standard answer. He said, well, look, I've made a lot of mistakes, which is, seems to come with the territory if you're going to scale. But then he said something very insightful. He said, so I went back and I looked at if there was a pattern among all my failures, and he found it. And he said, in almost every case, I thought I was the smartest person in the room. And so there's this chicken and egg where you've got to be a voracious learner. What gets you is not knowing what you don't know. But at the same time, you've got to be humble enough to say, hey, there's probably some people that are actually smarter. I know enough now to be dangerous and to keep them honest, but I'm going to go find smarter people to surround myself with in order to make decisions, whether it's what's going to be my new CRM system or, what's the constraint I need to address if I'm going to scale this company. And so I think those are really the 3. You got to hit the market timing right. You've got to be a voracious, hungry learner. And then number 3, but humble enough to ask for help.
And as you point out in the book towards the end, there should be unquestionable bias for action.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of people that have dreams. They don't really have visions. And then once you've got that, you've got to act on it. So we've always summarized our work in a very simple phrase. It's the end of the day, it's routines that set you free. It's what you do a little bit more or less of and different every day. The same with if you want to stay in shape, how did you eat today? Did you exercise today? And if you do it, you'll be in shape. If you don't, you won't. And that's that bias for action.
So once you are on this journey or for some it may be a treadmill, once
Yes.
you're on it, what can you do to make yourself better? As you say, there are 4 things that you have to do, the people, the strategy, and the cash, and the other thing, as you mentioned. Let's go through each one of them and how you distinguish yourself.
You got it. So let's start with people. And the first thing, and it was something that Steve Jobs' coach, Regis McKenna, taught me as well back in the early 80s. And that is, whenever you're facing something, take a piece of paper out and write down the names of all the key influencers, those that can help you. When Steve decided to launch iTunes, he didn't know anything about that business. So he took a piece of paper out, wrote down, all right, who are the biggest names in that space? And then who do I know? He only knew the drummer from the Eagles, had Don Henley come over. And then he said, hey, Don, do you know anyone on this list? And he began to work his way through it. When I launched ACE, the precursor to EO, they had me take a piece of paper out and I wrote down crazy things like, I want to get President Ronald Reagan to get behind this movement. I want to get Steve Jobs and Michael Dell and the head of Inc. magazine and Venture. And it was crazy, man. 36 months later, we had all of them, behind what was our global movement. And so the first thing is, if you're just trying to figure out how am I going to make my first 10 sales, you sit down with a piece of paper and you say, all right, who do I know that would know a potential customer? And you spend an hour a week, that's your official marketing meeting, working that list. And so that's our first recommendation on the people side. By the way, Bill Gates considered it the single best question he'd ever been asked. Who are the top influencers that he needs to spend time with? Just like Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook spending time with the president of China. Clearly a key influencer. And if you're a small business, you've got those same people locally in the media. Hey, if I could just get Sam to write an article about me in the local business journal, reviewers, opinion leaders, that if they say your restaurant's great, you're going to have a lot of other folks that come to your restaurant. In fact, almost in every industry, Manish, there's a handful of bloggers who really control the opinion in your industry. And I don't think entrepreneurs spend enough time like this father-son team did in Australia that came up with this little invention to make it easier to harvest your own honey from bees. And they found a handful of bloggers to get excited about their $600 product, let about 3 million people know, and they sold $12 million worth of it in 30 days. So sit down, make a list, and work the list. That's on the people side. On the strategy side, to me, the single most important decision, and there's a lot of them you got to make, and we outline those in the book, but the single most important first decision is, what is the word or two you want to own in the minds of the marketplace? I remember when my wife Julie gave birth to our first child, she absolutely wanted the safest automobile. Now, nobody owns the term automobile, but we clearly bought a Volvo. They, at that time, particularly owned that space in our minds. Google, the word that comes to mind besides Google is search. And that's still 90% plus of their revenue. And they've taken everything else they do and have stuck it in a different company. By the way, they stole that word from Yahoo. And that's why we see Yahoo being sold in kind of a fire sale right now. Tim Ferriss, I'm a big fan of. Tim owns 4 Hour work week, 4 Hour Body, 4 Hour Chef, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits. And if you're a local restaurant, you just want to be on TripAdvisor. If somebody puts in best Italian family restaurant, you want to make sure that at least you own that idea locally and online. And so in strategy, it's figuring out that word or two that you own, which means, by the way, it's more important that you are more narrowly focused in what it is you sell, to whom you sell, which again is not how it is in the beginning. In the beginning, you kind of say yes to any business that comes your way. And you've got to then cross this chasm where you say, all right, I've now been doing a lot of stuff for a lot of people. Let me figure out what I really like, what I'm really good at, and where I can make the most money. And that's when you got to quit. You got to go from saying yes every day to saying no a lot more. And that's really the fundamental definition of strategy. Those who say no to potential opportunities, partnerships, people they're going to hire, people they're going to work with, those who say no more than yes are those who've got the much better focused strategy. And so we look at that ratio of no's to yeses. On the execution side, here it's all about repetition. Can we just get the invoice out every Friday on time? And that's where we have 10, what we call Rockefeller Habits. that if you can get those in place, will give you those daily and weekly routines to make sure that you actually execute and communicate about your strategy. And then last, the key with cash is just don't run out. I mean, you can get by with decent people, decent strategy, decent execution, but not a day without cash. And the real lesson there, the mentor of mine, I'm a big fan of, is John Mullins at London Business School. He was a serial entrepreneur and then investor and now been professor for a dozen plus years. And he wrote a book called The Customer Funded Business. And in essence, that's what a lot of the crowdsourcing sites are. You're really getting customers to pre-order your product so you can get the cash in, then to fuel the business. And so we really encourage entrepreneurs continuously to fund their business off customer money. It's literally your best and cheapest money. By the way, good example everyone knows in the States is Costco. Their $55 and $110 membership, which was a crazy idea. What retailer would require a customer to have a membership to come in and spend a lot of money? Yet, those memberships represent about 2/3 of their total profitability, and they collect enough memberships continuously that they're able to fund their next warehouse operations. And so it's all been grown off of customer funds. So there it is: people, strategy, execution, cash. Make your list of influencers, figure out the word or two that you own, get in a set of good daily and weekly habits, the 10 we outline in the book, and then, if you can, drive the business off the customer's cash.
Very well said and explained. Most people don't realize scaling up or growing business is, in many ways, is a paradox. When you scale something, you involve more people. That involves more complexity. It gets harder and not easier. Unlike most people think that only if I'm 10 times bigger, my life would be easier. Really?
No, you're precisely right. It's that complexity that crushes you. It's hard enough. You go from yourself, which again is 76% of the businesses in the United States, to just getting one employee, and you've doubled the complexity. Anyone who's married understands that. Then you add that third person, and even though you only grew 50%, the complexity just tripled in terms of channels of communication. And so as you add products, customers, employees, locations, as you arithmetically add those, you geometrically increase the complexity, which is why we've identified and put these habits in place that allow you to kind of get your arms around that chaos so it doesn't crush you.
In many ways, what I've found is that when I talk to the other businesses or business leaders that have gone through the scaling up processes, especially the leaders or the owners of the business, what they do is they assume the role in their mind for several months or days or whatever it is to imagine how it would be when they reach their goal. So that what they're saying is that I want to feel what it would be like if I'm running a 10 times bigger business, and then prepare the whole organization for that challenge and move the entire organization steer that organization towards that goal. Is that something what you found also while talking to people? Or because how do you power up the people? Because the people you have are the ones who are going to make it happen. You alone is not going to do it.
Yeah. It sounds trite, but, it was Kennedy saying we're going to put a man on the moon. It's picking that Everest that you want to climb next, something that's big enough and exciting that it can excite other people. And that's what Jim Collins labeled, and we've borrowed that label from Jim in the book, this big, hairy, audacious goal. Now, even Mark Zuckerberg, as successful as he and his company are, this past year laid out their next 10-year road plan so that people have an idea of where we're headed. The Bible says without a vision, the people will perish. And so we need this North Star that we can always look to in terms of navigation. And then the only other decision you've got to be clear on is, what do we have to do next? The first step towards that North Star. Everything else in between we call a WAG, a wild ass guess. Because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Someone like Trump gets elected, which surprised not only our country, but the world. Great Britain decides that they're going to go ahead and Brexit. Another one of those surprising decisions. And all of a sudden, what were your great, wonderful plans have been knocked to the side. And in the process, what you've got to do is keep your eye on the prize. So where do you want to be in the next 10 years? And then what do you have to do tomorrow? And those are the only two things that you can remain sure about.
When you grow up or become big or scale up, you can become elephant. And just as 10 years ago, what we were talking about Yahoo, the way we are talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook today, that could in 2025 could be somebody else, and Facebook could be history.
Yeah, precisely. It's one of the reasons why we've been excited to discover a lot of large companies, GE, Intel, Coca-Cola, others that have discovered scaling up because they know that it's really easy inside the company to become that elephant. And really all scaling a large company is piecing a bunch of S curves together, figuring out how to cash cow what it is you've got and take that money and invest in the next growth engine. Something that Jeff Email, I think, is doing very well at GE. But it's tough because people don't like to change. They get comfortable and you begin playing not to lose rather than play to win. It's interesting. We're pretty excited here. We're at the home in Barcelona of FC Barcelona, one of the, greatest sports teams, if not greatest sports team, at least in the field of soccer that there ever has been. And they looked at the latest World Cup and you've seen it in all sports. The minute a team gets in the lead, they often have this tendency to start playing prevent defense, playing not to lose instead of continuing to keep the pedal to the metal and win. And the research is pretty clear in almost every case. 3/4 of the time, they're going to end up losing, in the last 2 minutes of the game or the last, 15 seconds in overtime. And that's what happens to large companies. And successful entrepreneurs, you've already kind of reached your goals and you sit down and you relax, and those who relax can end up dying as a result.
Well, let me play a little bit of devil's advocate. Listeners who are listening to this, they'll say, okay, I'm a 2-people operation. I have no money. I know what I'm doing. I'm good at it. But all these things that I hear is something I can never be. I cannot be even 1,000-people company. What is it takes me, or what can we tell these people who are skeptical that these are all consultant speak, but there's really no way for me to go from 2 people to 1,000 people? How can we help them to grow there?
Well, we like to say revenue's vanity, profit sanity, and cash is king. And so most entrepreneurs that I know really don't want to have a lot of employees. We're not one that's pushing, throwing bodies at the problem. But I don't know an entrepreneur out there that wouldn't like to make more money. And so at a minimum, in fact, we think this is the challenge. A friend of mine's writing a book on this. How big a company can you build with just yourself and no employees? And so scaling up isn't about just adding people. It's not about just piling on more revenue. It's about scaling your reach, scaling your impact. And I think scaling your pocketbook at some form and fashion. I think money is just a great indicator that you're delivering value, and it's a scorecard. And if you're making a lot of it, you must be helping a lot of people in the process. But you know what? My buddy Bo Burlingham wrote a book called The Small Giants and said, hey, there's something about keeping the business small as long as you're living the lifestyle that you've always wanted. Don't let guys like me mess you up.
Very well said. In some cases, it's not just scaling up, but it's scaling up to the right size that you are comfortable with and that you can live with. But the other thing is, as you brought up the issues and I was thinking about, is that what happens to the elephants? Why these elephants decay? What makes them lose their so-called mojo that they just become more and more defensive, as you were saying earlier?
Manish, that is not my expertise. The gentleman who endorsed my book, Jeffrey Moore, the famous Crossing the Chasm author, has got a book that's addressed 2 elephants and how to keep this from happening. I know it's an issue that Clayton Christensen, in his famous, Harvard book, Innovator's Dilemma, has worked, many, many decades on. And so let me stick to my knitting. And that is, I'm good at the scale up piece. And the flip side, we don't particularly have a lot of the big companies because they're hard to work with. So we're there to help the mid-market continue to scale.
You say it very well in one of the entrepreneurs who said that in the book, is that how do you find that ping in the business, getting the strategy right? Can you explain a little bit about how an entrepreneur can see that ping and then act on it?
Yeah, well, I know one way you can, and that's sitting in your office or sitting at home. The most important thing for you to do is get on the road. And that's what Alan Rudy does. When he acquires a company, first thing he does is commit 3 months where he goes out on the road and he talks to every customer that he can. And what he's doing is looking for these fact patterns. What is it that's constraining this business from really making a lot of money and taking off? And hey, let me just share that story since you brought it up in the book. So he simply bought a company that answers phones. And in fact, they were answering our phones at Gazelles. The problem is there's a lot of businesses that answer phones. They all have the same business model. You charge about $1 to $1.25 a minute. When you go talk to the customers, they're all upset about the same thing. Why do I have to pay for a wrong number? And why didn't your person write the person's number down correctly? And, so the same complaints and issues. And the problem is it's a commoditized offering. And so nobody can make a lot of money. You can't keep your people because you can't pay them a lot. And so it's a messy business. And so Alan likes to find messy businesses like that and see if he can find this ping. So he goes out, the secret to really making a lot of money in a boring business. And so he goes out on the road for 3 months talking to customers. What is it that's wrong with this business? How can we fix it? And he almost gave up, Manish. It was almost at the end of his deadline when he bumped into this Mary Maid franchisee. I don't think I actually mentioned who it was in the book, but it was a Mary Maid franchisee. And she goes, look, forget about charging me by the minute. What I really need you to do is I want to give you my appointment book and just book the appointment because I'm out actually cleaning, someone's home when the call comes in, and then I got to try to reach them, and then they got to try to reach me. Just take over the booking. And I would pay you $25 to book the appointment. And Alan knew it right then. He goes back, he looks at all his customers and realized that those that were in like HVA, plumbers and electricians and beauticians and doctors who would like you just to book an appointment. He pivoted to that particular market. By the way, we did not need him to book his appointment. So I remember him calling me up and saying, hey, Verne, it's been great having you a customer, but we're firing you. And he bundled all of us up that didn't need appointments booked and sold us off to Ruby Receptionist, who still does our phone answering today. Great job. And he went after only those who needed an appointment booked. And he ended up averaging not $1.25 an hour revenue, but something over $5 per minute. And when you're making, 4 times the industry average, you're going to make a lot of money. And that's what that was the idea that he scaled.
I think you explained very well in the book also, right in the beginning, is don't each give them tool to use. Are there any tools that you think that you have that you can bring up to the people who haven't read the book that could benefit them, especially in the execution?
Yeah, they can go right now for free to go to scalingup.com. And we've got a chapter called The Barriers. What are the 3 big barriers to scaling up? They can download for free. And we have all of our tools, including this famous 1-page strategic plan. Everyone says, hey, we got to get everybody on the same page, but you got to have the page. And so my wife has just launched a new business. She wants to really improve the olive oil that people consume daily in the United States, given our experience here in Europe. And so last September, we sat down over a lunch and she penciled out what we call her vision summary. What are their handful of core values? And by the way, that's driving her decisions around logos and campaigns and messaging. What's her purpose? She really wants to educate the Americans on what's better olive oil because it's critical to health. What are her 3 brand promises? Taste being number 1. Usually when people think of something healthy, they think it's got to taste bad. And so she said, these are the 3 things I'm going to promise the market about my product. And then what is her big, hairy, audacious goal? She wants to be the number 1 best tasting olive oil in the United States. And then she began to lay out, all right, given that, what do I have to do in 36 months? What do I have to do here in 2017, which is do well at the New York City olive oil show? And then what did she have to do that first month in September? And so we've got a single sheet of paper where people can just pencil out these fundamental decisions that you can use then to drive all the rest of the decisions that you're going to make moving forward. So that's probably our most powerful and most used tool.
We have been talking with Verne Harnish, author of Scaling Up, How a Few Companies Make It and Why the Rest Don't. So much about the book. Tell us a little bit more about you. How did you get into this and how was the experience in writing a book?
Well, thank you for asking. First of all, on writing the book side, my wife hates when I say this, but for me, at least for a man, it's the closest we come to giving birth. I mean, it is 9 months of just painful writing and wrestling with this entity. But then it's the most amazing experience when that box arrives and you open it up and you take out your baby that you birthed. And now you've got to spend a lot of time nurturing to make sure that it's loved by a lot more people than yourself. But it's an arduous process, but one that I encourage every entrepreneur to do, because if nothing else, it's the best business card that you can pass out is your story and the story about your business and what you stand for and the promises that you make and what you value. And so we have some kind of simple formats that we use with business owners to help them write this extended brochure, if you would, about their business. For me, in terms of background, I grew up around entrepreneurs. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. My dad was an entrepreneur. In fact, he and his partners grew a pretty significant company in Colorado and then lost it all in the 73 recession. And I saw my dad go into a massive depression. Really, he never recovered from it, Manish. And I swore then that I would do what I could to keep other entrepreneurs from suffering what my dad suffered. And so this is a very missional thing for me. And this is my 35th year of seeing what I can do to help entrepreneurs scale and not suffer what my dad did.
Thank you very much. Is there any advice that you give to the other authors who may be considering to write books? That should they have a one-page strategy page?
No, but my number one advice is self-publish. Unless you think you're the next Harry Potter, the publishers, even if they give you an advance, they're not going to do one thing to sell one book. They have already calculated that you're their number one customer, and they're going to turn around and sell you your book for a lot of money. Self-publishing, I've got a 256-page 4-color book, hardcover, that costs no more than about $3 to print. And so even if you're going to go out and do a free presentation to the local Rotary, you can say, hey, I'm happy to speak for free, but why don't you buy everybody a copy of the book for $15? And if there's 50 people there, they give you $750. And because you only have $3 or $4 in the book, you made $500 for the speech, which isn't bad. It's better than nothing. And by having them inexpensive, you can give them away like candy. So I bundle them up, and they're a marketing tool for us. Then to go ahead and upsell our consulting and coaching and other services that support the implementation. So number one, self-publish and keep control of your destiny. It's so easy to do nowadays.
And I hope you can use Readara to find other editors and copy designers and helping you in actually bring your book to the actual scale it up so that you can actually publish a book nowadays.
Precisely. It's a wonderful world that you can access. Amazing amount of talent. The woman who designed my book and all of our materials, I had employed for a decade, and I finally met her last year. And so you can get a lot done through these networks.
Now, here's a question that you were bringing up earlier, talking about while answering something else. We live in a world that is dramatically different today than even just 20 years ago because of the impact of the telecommunication and the internet. We can reach more people, we can work efficiently, we can collaborate together with others. And for an example, a company like WhatsApp, which is a messaging company on smartphones, did not even have 55 people when it was sold or bought by Facebook with more than $15 billion of purchase price. What I'm saying is you can scale up now, leveraging the technology, leveraging the network effect in a far better way, and you can still have the revenue for vanity and the cash for the sanity, as you mentioned. That would not have happened in the world of manufacturing or retail as we are used to in the traditional sense.
Manish, all I can say is you're absolutely right. It's a thing that my wife's looking at, which is, hey, she's taken her Facebook channel and her Instagram, and she's saying, look, right there are my not only initial customers, but they're going to be the evangelists to help me bring in more customers. To a broader point, there are these unicorns. There's roughly 170 of them in the world, these companies that scale to $1 billion very quickly, like Amazon and Facebook and those that you mentioned. And so So and Uber and Airbnb. And so I went in and I said, all right, what do they all have in common that us mere mortals could copy to help scale our business? And in essence, the thing they have in common is they have figured out in their business model how to get a lot of people to help them for free. I mean, think about Google. They built an algorithm that taps into the collective intelligence of everyone who's ever been on the internet. And that's what delivers up the answer, not a bunch of smart people typing fast. What makes Amazon so sticky is they've had millions of people take time to give reviews to all their products. My wife won't book a restaurant or hotel unless she's gone to TripAdvisor. And that's because they have gathered all of that feedback and input from millions of people, of which they've not paid a penny. Even Facebook, 1.7 billion pages. And it's not like they put all those pages up. They got 1.7 billion people working for them every day for free, sometimes harder for them than they are the company that they're working at. And so that's what I love about that Aussie father-son team who used the crowdsourcing funding site to make their first 12 million in sales in 30 days to 36,000 people around the globe. And that's from Australia, one of the most isolated parts on the planet. And it's all because of the technologies that you described.
Well, with that message of hope, and thanks for your time. Thank you very much for talking to us. And please do keep up in mind if you have another book when you say fly up.
Will do, Manish. We got 6 in the works right now. So we're going to continue to crank intellectual capital.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Take care.